Okay, so here we are, and I'm here now with Chad Hansen at the Philosopher's Corner, and we're going to talk more about the determinism discussion, error determinism, and agency. To what extent do people have agency, or what does it mean to say that the universe or that all reality is fully deterministic, or any of the above? What would be some of the haggle you want to get into there, Chad?
Well, I think the first one I want to talk about, I have lots of notes here now, but it's been a while, so I can't even remember what some of them are about. But um, you speak of the past, and it says uh, that the past is it could not have been otherwise.
Now that it is the past.
Yeah, no, that's the distinction I didn't get because when you were talking and it was just kind of on the fly, and you said, it could not have been otherwise. But I'm thinking if that were true at the time that it happened, then that's determinism. But it's not that it couldn't have been otherwise, but that it is as it was, and it will always be as it was.
Given how it is now.
Yes, I mean it could have been at the time. They could have made different. I mean, if we're not determined, they could have made different choices, right?
Yeah,
And so the
well,
past could have turned out differently.
yeah, I think there's a sense of agency. I mean, for me, the issues of the hardline determinist position come down to the kinds of contradictions that seem to be the smuggling in of some kind of agency, and it's often by language choices which reveal something like an insertion of a time block which isn't just a domino from the previous one. That somebody somehow smuggles in okay, here's a starting point. Because there aren't really any starting points. They're all just kind of buried in a really hard line determinist position. Right? It seems that 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 again it's a predestinationist position, the fully hardline determinist position. It again depends on how people are going to shake it out. But I think
Yeah.
some of the things that I was having issue with is, some people were saying in the comments, they were saying, well, what you should do is realize that people shouldn't feel guilt, they shouldn't feel pride, and that there's all of these kinds of emotions are faulty because no one really has any agency, and so you shouldn't feel bad about that you're much more a product of your life circumstances than anything like pride or guilt would allow you to understand, and that those are obstacles to realizing the nature of reality. It's sort of like these are the arguments. And related to that are people saying, on the other side of that is that, well, what you need to realize is that deterrence is brought about by harsh, harsh penalties, and in places where they, chop off hands and have death penalties. Well, this keeps people from committing crimes, and well, then you start to go, well, wait a second. Can you have that both ways? Can you just say you're a kind of ping pong ball on water, but then also act like there is a meaningful thing called deterrence? And then the question, to me, the $1,000,000 question becomes: at what age do you tell people that the world is deterministic? Because it seems like if deterrence is at all possible, then part of the agency that people have is telling them and helping them understand that they're agents.
Yeah, very certainly. Um, yeah, and I think that there's an embedded contradiction there in that determinism and deterrence thing that many people who are trying to make the argument because they want determinism in a sense, but they also want to be free too, right? I mean, almost they want a compatibilism or
Right. Well, I
whatever,
think
Um,
compatibilism. I mean, that it makes sense to me to say that. I mean, we're back to the what do we mean by determinism? Like, does determinism mean, like, I heard Bob Logan one time at a conference, physicist, who I like a lot. I'm doing work with him. He says, well, look, if you look to the left and to the right when you're going to cross a street, you're a determinist. And his point was, yeah, if you believe that physical laws will come into play, if you don't step out of the way of the oncoming vehicle, well, if that's what we mean by determinacy, well, of course, yes,
that's well and good, right?
that sounds real good to me. But when people start to say, no, this you that you think of as an agent is an illusion because your brain is making decisions before you're really doing things, and your brain is subject to all kinds of whatnot, to which I want to go, okay, I understand and I agree with that. And, could it be that if my sugar level is low, I act in a different way, or if I haven't had a certain amount of sleep, can that affect me? All these kinds of things. Yes and yes and yes. But that still doesn't mean that there isn't, through evolution and through forms of communication technology and culture, the emergence of degrees of agency. And it has to do with this expanded experience of presence that I think people have. They don't just feel themselves to just be broken off in a now. The now is an elongated stretch that has retentions of plans that they know they've had for a while, of some things that come up unexpectedly. They have some anticipated sense of where they're going, and all of these are this sort of what you said. There's this domain, and then like agency is like a ball around in it, and it's sort of like that. It's like, how wide is that domain that people consciously experience themselves, and to what extent is that not illusory? I mean, is time? I think if someone's going to say agency is an illusion, they might as well say time is an illusion as well. And then we're going to go, at a certain point you go, okay,
Yeah,
but
and
I
actually,
still make plans for this Thursday where I'm going to meet someone for lunch, and we can meet there.
yeah, and actually, I think time is a key idea for me because as far as my understanding of what has happened historically, time is an idea we develop, and we get close to the intricacies of time by understanding, or at least experiencing, causality. We are certainly causal agents, but then if I come out in the morning and I see that somebody has messed up, I come out of my teepee and somebody's messed up my fire is messed up, then I say, well, how could that have happened? And I reach back to the past at a time when I wasn't there. And so causality is necessarily a sort of time structure. And I do believe that things are causally, I don't know about a principle of causality, but clearly things are causally related.
Right.
But then if you take that idea and expand it, in a sense, to its logical implication, then everything is connected causally. And then we have its extreme determinism that I think is just unjustified myself.
Right. Again, I think that's a great way to say it. I think, okay, so let's see if we can do that. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that there are different planes, and we'll call one plane the plane of emotion and feeling, which we'll say is kind of caught in a domain of indexical nows, sort of relations of how it's sort of feeling, of kind of how it's getting bumped around and pinged upon, sudden opportunities of nourishment, of available mating, whatever. I mean, the whole range of just sort of right in the immediate now. And then that's so different, though, than the kinds of communication technologies that allow the organism to have abstract information about other than the now. And it's sort of like there's a kind of agency even in an organism that has feeling. I mean, the feeling is this, I guess, domain of the present that's very constricted, but it's this horizon of selective behavior that is responding to its environment in an evaluative way.
Yes, exactly. Citing positive or negative emotional values.
Right. And it seems like, my emotions may be literally determined by the kinds of environments I'm in, but because I can speak about myself, language operates at this whole decontextualized level with symbols that allow me to make reference to where I'm going to be potentially 5 days from now, 5 weeks from now, 10 years from now. That allows me to potentially put me in situations which could affect that feeling level. So I think there are ways that I can sort of sentence myself to my own determinacy. Like, I can take advantage of the determinacy. Like, if I say, well, yeah, it's all determined, well, does that mean I can't take advantage of that then? No, I think I can. That's how I harness my sails. That's how I learn how to, devise brakes for my car, is because I believe in determinism.
Yeah, or actually, I would prefer the word you used earlier was determinacy.
Yeah.
To kind of distinguish it between the belief, the philosophy of determinism in a sense, right? Because I think maybe in the language I want to use, the belief in determinism is taking that natural understanding of determinacy and apotheosizing, making it a cosmic rule,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's at a higher level of abstraction where we can abstract and deal with those kinds of things. We apply them down to the levels where they don't necessarily apply in the same way. So it becomes a sort of a false doctrine, right? At least in I believe that there are causal connections. I believe that in a sense, the basic framework of the universe produces certain necessities, but that also, when consciousness comes in, provides the arena that is much wider than the area of consciousness itself that allows the consciousness to sort of free range,
Yeah.
producing the freedom.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think you could say that reality is it's always happening at multiple levels, and there is a sense in which you can kind of do this. It's always only the now, and in the now you can deal with all of the sort of sum total of causal relations as they're coming together and crystallizing to achieve this kind of moment. And it's not to deny any of that. I think at all
Yeah.
points, all
Mm-hmm.
reality is literally caught within a determined causal nexus of relations, and yet at other levels of abstraction. Now, when we start to say a level of abstraction, okay, where is a level of abstraction? Because it seems like once we get to, so like as I'm speaking right now, there's a causal series of forces that are producing the acoustical blasts that are coming out of my mouth, but the recognition of the words as words are occurring at a higher level of abstraction than the recognition of the sounds. I mean, someone who doesn't speak the language could recognize that I'm speaking, and they could hear maybe the sounds and some of the sound values, even if they couldn't recognize the words. So when you recognize the words, we're at a different level of abstraction, and it seems like at that, there's a kind of representational plane that even if it's completely fictional, like I could make plans to meet with you 2 weeks from now, and a planet could come on a crash course and take us out. It might never happen, but we still do make plans for the future. And so, even though, how do I say that, language isn't causing us to meet there and then, but it somehow becomes part of that agency which we harness in the now to gear and use the unfolding determinacy to certain
Well,
ends.
I mean, language provides language is an abstraction in itself. The words are not the things, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
that allows us, in a sense, to play with the words. It's the same thing. It's the same reason, for instance, that wolves or whoever in evolutionary history, they start running the scenario through their head of, can I get this rabbit, as opposed to actually chasing each one down, because it's less energy and more play, in a sense, more possibilities of scenario, right? Language, in a sense, provides the same thing, because the words are not the things. We can do whatever we want with the words, things we can't do to the thing.
Right, right. See, I think this is one of the most underappreciated aspects, is that when people try to do the index icon symbol thing, I think they end up trying to say that all words arguably are nothing more than indices. That is, you can just trace them back to the particular usages that people have. And what they're really saying is there's no such thing as imagination. See, I think the role of imagination really needs to be grasped. That,
Yes.
like, to what extent am I? So let me try it this way. So some people will say that that all decisions were made at your birth. That somehow that was the fateful decision, and it precast all of what you were going to be able to experience, what was going to be your range of all these kinds of things, and it's sort of like it denies that. I think it denies that people talk to themselves and with themselves. Like this, if I were such that I learned the language of whatever language I'd fallen into. So we know that babies learn the language that they fall into. Okay, so you take a baby. If it's not surrounded by anyone, it doesn't learn any language. But whatever community you drop it into, it will just acquire the native tongue of those people. And so if you get at that, you say, well then, what does that mean that people are just caught being the tools of their society and they're literally just a product? Well, no, because they talk to themselves. They don't just learn to talk with other people and learn the language of those people. That one of the functions of language includes the recursivity to talk to oneself. And at that point, now you can question how your society has taught you to think about things, how to examine things, and the little bit of free imaginative space that language provides sentences everyone. That is, it determines them to experience their agency. That is, like I think there is a compatibilist position. Like one could say that reality happens at multiple levels, and because language is symbolic, it forces people to be free. It constrains them into an agency because now they're caught in a self-relation, and the relation of self always has to pull from the past to the present or the present to the future. They can't fully be in the present, which in the deterministic universe, it's always only the present and the time is the illusion. Time isn't an illusion, it's constitutive of who we are.
Yes, no, and in terms of for the determinists, it's always now. For the determinists, there are not different. To me, if it's absolute determinism, there's only one level. There's no levels of it because it's all. And now, also, the kind of compatibilism you just explained, I'm right along with. But now, if we're talking about compatibilism in the sense of God can know everything that's already laid out, so in a sense, it's hard determinism, and yet in here, I can be free to make my decision. That to me is a contradiction.
No, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I think that the question is how atomistic, how pulverized and razor edged is the now? Is the now such that it's an instant, or is the now an elongated stretch and a retaining that awaits? I mean, how long must the now be in order for you to be able to understand a sentence such as this? That is, the words themselves are somehow vanishing, yet you must be, in your memory and imagination, able to retainingly await the sentence's completion. So how could the now be a vanishing now? It must be longer than an instant.
Well, and it's kind of like almost now you made me think of the duality or the complementarity, I should say, between position and momentum. I mean, in quantum physics, if you have exact information about where something is, then you have no information about where it's going. But if you have the information about what direction it's moving and what the speed, then it's kind of blurred out, and it's not in any one distinct place. It's more blurred out, which is more like the present that we actually live in than our mathematical present at this instant, right?
Right. I mean, I think that some of the physics examples are interesting. Like for me, it's sort of kind of like gravity in that maybe my earlier example of the stretching along, it is well also too atomistic. Although it's good phenomenologically that it's rich right here and we can experience for ourselves the sense. There's another sense that's maybe a little bit more mystical along the lines that you're suggesting, which is that so much of language is historical and that there are unseen others who aren't here, who are right now mediating. They're like working as translators between us. That is, there are like third parties who've invented the words that now we're borrowing in order for us to make sense with each other.
I think you pointed out to me just a few weeks ago how much people talk in things that they've just heard, the things that they've always heard. And I realized I do the same thing myself. And then, of course, when we're writing, we try to incorporate that, but also, kind of stretch that and stuff like that. But really, I mean, like the word disaster, which we know what the word disaster means. But originally, dis is bad and aster is star. And so it's just the star crossed in a sense,
Right.
And we still have that. No, clearly, people do not think of astrology when they think of the word disaster, but they're still using a tool made by somebody who had those ideas in the past right? And
So, I
also,
mean, Chad, I mean, that's a great thing. I mean, you know so much about word roots and word origins and etymology and stuff. I mean, I think that would be a great example of here. And see, let's get at this issue of the elongated present. So in one sense, we talked about just not the atomistic now, but instead we tried to show that speech itself must be an elongated kind of present. And then I recently shot a video where I was talking about it, and then after I recorded the video, I had the time to insert a little me speaking over it before I uploaded the video. You know, me going, should I say something? Whatever, right? And then I uploaded it.
yeah.
And that's, again, an elongated thing. And now if you take history itself, we could take etymology and try to look at the way that we're now in a ancient invisible ship of other people's intentions. So some person coined a word by bringing together two concepts that for them was an innovative neologism, but for us now has become part of so it's like the actual growing of the time of the experience of agency has to do not just with a single consciousness, but with consciousness being intersubjectively symbolic and us being able to use in the present others' past accomplishments.
Yes, and that's, I think, ties right into McLuhan's idea of environment and anti-environment, and the medium being the message, right? Because what was a new message for the person who coined the term and, you know, use it now, it's just part of our environment. The word disaster, which we use constantly, or discard. I discard all kinds of things that are not cards. Right. You know, I'm not throwing my cards down, right? And matter of fact, to the person who I think one of the earliest people to recognize something like this, at least in writing, is Vico, John Battista Vico, because what he says is, every metaphor is like a little myth. It has this history of how it was coined, and it has, you know, the connotations and denotations back then, which we no longer see, but we still use the word with newer, you know.
Right. See, now that's what's so interesting, because I think some person, if they're going to be overly reductive, they will try to deny that the symbolic is, quotes, an arbitrary or an imputed relation. What they'll say is that what you need is a rigorous archaeology, and you could trace back all of its usages and all of the ways that it is. But what they're denying is the person who was there in the imaginative moment of leaping ahead spontaneously created the word, because the history of their words weren't well meeting the newly created worldly situations and environments that were coming about. So I do think it's this environment and the environment. So it's like language is continuously a little bit outdated. Like we're all antique dealers and being language dealers, and we're caught using words that no longer fit, and so we're caught imaginatively having to create words. And to say that there's not some kind of agency exercise there, I think it really diminishes the extent. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't causal nexus at all points, but to deny what history is or what culture is, the people who want to say that there is no agency, they make it, or the hardline determinists, they kind of make it seem like there is no meaningful distinction between culture and nature. Like, didn't culture happen? I think culture did happen.
Even not the learning beyond condition, adaptive learning, and maybe even aversion behavior. But I mean, it seems to me you have to have certain alternatives of choice if you're going to be able to take in some information and use it in a different way. In other words, you learn something, you're not going to react the way you did before. I'm going to hold off for a second and do this other reaction. Now, granted, that could all be totally programmed. As a matter of fact, I do want to point out that there could be a notion of error in a perfectly deterministic world, because you're predetermined to think, I'm shooting for this goal, and you're predetermined to miss that goal, and you're predetermined to say, oh, I missed that goal. But that's all really that's the illusion. I mean, you know, in a deterministic world, the illusion is freedom. But if we really have freedom, and clearly we can't have that absolutely. Again, that's just a contradiction, right?
Right. I mean, I think maybe a different way to say it is that it's determinism all the way down at
No, it's
one
turtle.
level, but at another level, you'd want to get at what is culture, if not a new way of time relating to itself, and it's how does time itself open to itself in different ways, and you could say that nature, and we are nature, and at the level that we're nature, it's a program. And again, program is such a bad word, but people use this kind of programming word, so we'll say it's a program. But at the level of culture, we're a story. It's a narrative. And there's such a difference between a narrative and a program. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I think one of the key ideas there is something you mentioned before, which was one of my pet ideas, was neoteny. The fact that with mammals, and particularly primates, that neotenous stage in our lives, which is sort of, because for snakes, birth, in a sense, is a sort of instantaneous thing, because when they come out, they're, in a sense, fully developed. They go off on their own. But for mammals, increasingly for primates, and our birth is sort of an extended thing, right? We don't get separated from our mother right away. We hang out, and we're one in the sense of communication, because primates use that staring in the faces for that emotional communication, that bonding. So in a sense, that's almost the sort of first stretching out of the now. It's not the instantaneous now of reptilian birth, but the extended neotenous now of mammalian birth.
Oh, I think that's so fascinating. I think it wouldn't be a hard argument to make to say that you could look at the last, say, 200 years and look at the Industrial Revolution and then the information explosion as a human neoteny, call it the super strategic retardation of the human. That is, the human has never undergone more radically of a kind of neoteny. That is, when you look at most people's hands today, look at their bodies, we look like little children. The hands are smaller. The hand. It's so much of it has to do with, I think, people are no longer exposed to the elements in a way. And it's like you can soon enough see images of an infant running a computer. Like, here would be the question: to what extent is there a relationship between information, knowledge, and wisdom? And isn't wisdom on the decline because the aged are no longer respected, and information is what we really love?
Yeah, that's why it's going to lead to idiocracy, right?
Well, you're going to have babies running computers because that's increasingly what's happening. You can see that's the cultural undergoing a kind of neoteny.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that there is a parallel physical evolution. I think it's called paidogenesis, paido being the Greek word for child. And the point is that we as adults look more like our ancient ancestors' babies than we do look as adults. And as we go into the future, we're going to, so physiologically, maybe that's the explanation for male pattern baldness, which is so there's that physical paidogenesis along with the psychological paidogenesis of. But I mean, you're actually talking about the physical paidogenesis, the fact that we are because we are protected from the elements so much that we can afford to be a little softer, and so that accommodates the physical paidogenesis. And of course, the physical paidogenesis comes from the fact that we're selecting in the very beginning our babies, and so it's like Stephen Jay Gould had this article. I think it was one of his. I think what did he write in not Nature or Smithsonian article on the evolution of Mickey Mouse, where he starts out looking like a rat. But then, as they draw him over the years, he becomes more and more baby-like and more mouse-like, because those are the kind of things we want to cuddle and want to take care of, and so we're attracted unconsciously to them, even if we don't really want to cuddle it. We prefer looking at Mickey Mouse as opposed to Mickey Rat.
Right. I mean, it's a small scale. You can see it in the domestication of the dog, from the wolf to the little pet we now today see these cute little fuzzy, and the characteristics have, I mean, this is classic neoteny, right? I mean,
for sure.
We're grooming ourselves and cultivating ourselves into a kind of informational neoteny.
Yeah, and actually, it's not only a sort of a temporal neoteny. Now, of course, neoteny, strictly speaking, means just stretching out a extending of neo, the youth.
Right.
But we're even stretching out our consciousness in the sense of at a very young age. And I intentionally did this with my child to make sure that he was aware of certain ideas about the size and of the universe, the immensity of, so even psychologically, an understanding of the space is so much extended along with this extension of time.
Right.
And of course, it's hard to think of a time without a space that you can live in. And so when you put those two together, we have this, in a sense, as a matter of fact, it's a new arena that's immense and gives us such amount of freedom
Right.
in terms of possible movement.
Right. See, I think that's interesting because I think in some way, though, I end up circling back that it seemed like if earlier organisms have limited amount of ranges of agency, and then as you move toward animals that can, who have greater amounts of motility, greater amounts of memory, greater amounts of imagination, all the, the hands, there's different things that have amplified the bodily sense of agency. But I guess it seems like the drift, although I guess it's sort of celebrated in communication technologies, the drift is almost back toward the denial of freedom, or how can we design a human culture that hides from the freedom? That is, you could see religious institutions as humans trying to hide from their freedom. So they create dogmas that they say tell them what they need to do. And then you could say, well, then they created governments that hide from the, and in each case, now we create truth, and truth becomes this kind of thing that we're hiding from. And it's sort of like if you go from the veneration that people have, again, from information to knowledge to wisdom, it seems like there was a high point of the recognition of human agency when we applauded and venerated wisdom. And then as we sort of move to knowledge, well, then we're like, well, some people wisdom we don't believe in, that sort of stuff. And then by the time you get to the cult of information, where, whoever has the most information wins, and that's the person who we trust, I think it's almost like we no longer believe in agency, or it's a different kind of agency, and it's sort of like you could see it now at the end of two scales, where at the beginning is very limited amount of agency and freedom, and then a big, wide expanse of it for thousands of years in humanity, which was like an evolutionary experiment. And then the human, it was too much. It was too much anxiety, too much thrashing around. And now we're going to culturally redesign ourselves back in the image of a nature which didn't have to experience self-aware consciousness. That self-aware consciousness was too much. It was an environmental experiment, and we're trying to get out of it.
Well, it's hard work, and it's frightening. If you're the agent that's responsible, then you've got to do the stuff to make things happen, right? It's hard work. It's harder than going with the flow,
right.
But it's frightening because, I can see potential futures. What if I screw up, or what if I'm blindsided by something that, gets in the way of my agency? And so I can understand that sort of, I don't want to call it a cowering from agency, but sort of at least obviously an anxiety. And that's exactly what we see in many primitive societies. There is an anxiety there. I mean, part of it's involved with killing, like that guilt of killing, but the anxiety of the fact that now we've for 10,000 years created all these forces, these deities, and all these magical potentials that, oh man, and this is going to come along and wipe me out at any time.
Right. I mean, I wonder yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, so you back away from the agency a little bit, right?
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's partly conscious. It partly seems like it's cultural force. But yeah, people are grooming themselves to become robots. They don't realize it, but they want their children to be robots. They're increasingly alienated from spontaneity, novelty, and interaction. They sit with their little handheld laptops. this is such a quiet, isolated, lonely generation compared to previous generations. They're quiet. Again, they're isolated. They don't spend a lot of time in contact and touching each other. They spend a lot of time concerned with information.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic too because they're isolated, but they're also constantly communicating with other people on their their iPads and their iPhones and like that. But they're physically isolated.
Right. It's sort of a machine-like metaphor, and you can see it as a kind of a grooming for an emotionally detached, let's just exchange information now.
And actually, I need to get more into McLuhan because I'm thinking more of I grew up in a small town. When you walk down the street, you look at everybody in the eye, and even if you don't know them, you say, "How you doing?" Where you can't afford to do that in downtown LA.
Right.
You wouldn't have time to do anything else, and you're never going to see these people again anyway, right?
Right.
So there's that interplay of culture and the means of production and means of communication and all that.
Right. Well, we probably talked longer than anyone wants to hear us talk about. Anything else you want to say about I think we hammered a lot of stuff out there.
No, I think I'm fine right now. I'm definitely going to think about more, and I'll be coming back to you to haggle with you a little bit more.
Awesome. Well, it was great to see you, Chad, and sounds very cool. Okay.